into Revelation chapters 17 and 18, we are now going to see an emphasis placed upon that of Babylon. As a matter of fact, here in chapter 17, verse 5, it mentions Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Throughout these two chapters, we are going to see the expression from the angel of what exactly and who exactly this Mystery Babylon, mother of all harlots, is. And we will see both an idolatrous / religious view of her, as well as that of an economic view of Mystery Babylon the Great. But there's something important that we need to understand and that is that John has a great familiarity with the city of Babylon. He understands the history of it. He understands the development. But here in the Greek, the word mysterion, translated to mystery, means that there is something going on that is beyond the knowledge of the norm. And so there's going to have to be a greater explanation that is given. And taking into consideration that some of us may not have had the opportunity to read and study through the scriptures, we're going to take now a moment and we're going to familiarize ourselves with Babylon, i.e. Babel, and what exactly ultimately occurred to bring us to the place where Mystery Babylon the Great becomes such an emphasis. And for that, we're going to be going back to Genesis chapter 10, reading from verses 8 to 10. Now, take into consideration that this is very early on after the flood had occurred and the waters had receded. Noah goes forth with his sons, and now there is a repopulation that is taking place over the earth because the lives of these individuals was still well extended beyond that of a century, in some cases 200, 300, 400 years. And we saw the diminishing of the life of man as a result of the water layer, the level of moisture that occurred that was over the earth. If you'll remember, it said that it didn't rain at one point in time. It was a mist that covered the face of the earth, and that after the flood that all of these things changed. And it is believed that because that had changed, that the level of radiation that was coming from the sun would diminish man's life. I don't want to digress or become tangential and start getting off onto rabbit trails. But the point here is that man had repopulated the earth, and as he was repopulating the earth, that their attitudes towards turning away from God began to reoccur. It's just the nature of man. In our fallen state, we just want to do things on our own. And so let's go ahead and pick up in Genesis chapter 10, starting with verse 8. And it says, and Cush begat Nimrod. This is the ending now of a genealogy, or the entrance into a genealogy here. And Nimrod becomes a key figure. It says, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. So his name became predominant amongst those who were on the earth. He was showing leadership skills. People were following him, things of that nature. Verse 9, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So he was a mighty hunter before the Lord to such a degree that they gave him that title. But before we just skip beyond this before the Lord statement, it's important to understand that this is not a positive thing. To be this mighty hunter before the Lord, it's the same as in our own day and age saying he was a mighty hunter in the face of God. Kind of, he was his own man. I'm going to do things my way. I can take care of myself. I don't need you. And he was in God's face with regards to his attitude. We're going to see that as we move towards a portion of Genesis chapter 11. Here's important information here in verse 10 of chapter 10, and it says, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of, and here's another important word, Shinar. Shinar is the area. Babel was the primary town. He is establishing a kingdom for himself in Babel, in Shinar. So if you can imagine, Shinar would be the region, Babel would be one of the towns in the region to eventually become the primary city. Let's continue on. Now let's pick up in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1, and we read, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech." Okay, now, this is important, and there is a distinction between one language, one speech. The idea of the language is that we are all communicating the same language. We are all speaking English. We all speak Spanish. We all speak whatever language you want to fit into that. That's what we are all communicating with. And it says, and of one speech, meaning we were all on the same page. We were all talking and had our attitudes all on the same page. I don't like God. Neither do I. Neither do I. We're all on the same page. We're all against God. And so as a result, they were joined together in a common attitude that would appear to be influenced by that of Nimrod, who was in the face of God. And we'll see that come to light. In verse 2 it says, "And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there." So you see now, it is the plain of Shinar. Those cities are associated to it. Verse 3, "And they said one to another, Go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar." So they're now involved in construction. Here's what their objective is. In verse 4 it says, "And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven." Oh. Let us of the same language, who are all on the same page with our speech and our attitude, let's now go and build this tower, and this tower is going to reach to heaven. We are going to show God that He is not beyond us, that we have the capability of reaching up to Him. And when we are there, we're just going to thumb our nose in His face. Because who does He think we are? We're not going to let Him rule over us. That's not going to happen. If you're paying close attention to the study, and if you're paying close attention to where we were headed, especially in Revelation chapter 13, all of this is going to start sounding familiar, and we'll point that out as we move forward. And in verse 5 it says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." In other words, what God is saying is not so much it's a bad thing that man is working together and accomplishing much, but they are working together in opposition to God. The primary kingdom on the earth at this moment in time is working in opposition to God with an attempt to eliminate themselves from under His authority. Does that begin to sound familiar? So let's continue on. In verse 7 it says, "Go to, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." They're not going to be able to communicate in such a manner that they are on the same page with one another. That's all God had to do, was just affect their speech, affect their language, and He would put them in a state of confusion. Does this sound an awful lot like Psalms 2? Why did the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? And later on within that same chapter, it says God will have them in a state of derision or in a state of confusion. God always will remove himself or interject a circumstance which puts people in a state of confusion. You want to seem less confused in your life? Then what you want to do is be on God's page because God is not the author of confusion, but of order, as in all the churches, as Paul has spoken to the church of Corinth. So now, verse 8, it says, "So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did therefore confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." Now, there are some important points that we need to make with regards to this situation, which help us to understand better Mystery Babylon the Great. First of all, there was a singular leader. A singular leader. Number two, it was a singular economy. Number three, it had a singular idolatrous religion. And number four, all of which made the population subservient to that one particular ruler and that one particular leader. Kind of like a one world government that was in charge of the economy. You can't buy or sell unless you take the mark of the beast, and that you must worship his image and worship the beast. And it didn't make a difference whether the people were great, small, poor, free, bond, slave. Didn't make a difference what the situation was. Everybody was subservient to that rule. Now, it's important for us to familiarize ourselves with some of the players in greater detail, some of which the information is extra biblical and comes from Jewish tradition and all. Nimrod, of course, is not from Jewish tradition. He is a recognized figure. We see him biblically here. But the thought here is that he ends up taking a wife, and that wife is Semiramis. Important to note, Semiramis is the one who eventually begins idolatrous worship, which comes out of Babylon. So when you think of Nimrod, think of a one world ruler and think of the individual in charge of the economy. When you think of the harlot, Mystery Babylon the Great, the whore that sits on the beast, which we will see as we enter into Revelation chapter 17 in our next or second to next study, that she is the one that goes forth, and she is the one that establishes now idolatry throughout the earth. So what exactly ends up taking place? She has a desire for a position of power. She wants to be the queen. There's no way she's going to be the king. Jewish tradition states that Shem, the son of Noah, ends up killing Nimrod. As a result, Semiramis ends up spreading the falsity that what happened with Nimrod is that he ultimately then became a god. Sound familiar? And he became the sun. And so therefore, if we wanted to continue to worship Nimrod as we were before, we just had to worship the sun. But there's an issue that exists here for Semiramis. You see, Semiramis does not have a child. And so she is at risk of losing her position. So what she does is she falsifies a story. She becomes impregnated and makes the claim that as a result of immaculate conception, she is impregnated by Nimrod, who is now the sun god. And as such, her pregnancy brings forth a son. That son is named Tammuz. We will see his name pop up here shortly as we move forward in this introduction to Babylon. So now we have Nimrod out of the picture. He is, quote unquote, the sun god. He is also, in essence, the foundation for Baal worship. Baal worship. That would be a name that is very familiar to those of you who have read through the Word of God and recognized that these things are constantly in battle. Elijah battled against it. Elisha battled against it. They were constantly battling against Baal worship. And it leads itself all the way back to Babylon. It leads itself back to Mystery Babylon the Great. So now we have Semiramis and we have Tammuz. What Jewish tradition tells us is that Semiramis, in order to maintain her position on the throne that she had as the queen, she marries her own son. She marries her own son. And as such, she holds her position as the queen over Babylon. So now you see that Babylon is a center point for a singular rulership, a dictatorship. And secondly, she is instituting now a form of idolatrous worship that is going to permeate throughout the entire earth. It is stated by some that Tammuz goes out on a hunting trip, and as a result, he is lost for a period of time. Some state that he is killed by a wild beast, and that his body is never recovered. And because of this, now what ends up taking place is that people went out in mourning, searching for Tammuz. Over a period of time, and as odd as it may seem, from this idolatrous worship comes forth what we now know today as an Easter egg hunt. You say, well, how on earth does that happen? Well, if you were to take a look at different cultures, they have a different name for Semiramis. You'll hear the term Oshera. You'll hear the term Eostre. You'll hear the term Eshtara. And what it is that we use is Easter. It's the word that we use for this. Now, why does a bunny go out and hide Easter eggs? We're going to see that there is always the expression of fertility and procreation, which is an emphasis upon sexual activity. The bunny goes forth because it is an expression of kind of a free sexual mindset. You know, you'll hear the term. They reproduce like rabbits. We're somewhat involved in kind of a homesteading thought process, and a lot of people raise rabbits for food. And one of the things that's a benefit to raising rabbits for food is that they reproduce rapidly, which means that you will always have a meat source. They just reproduce. They are always having intercourse and reproducing. This might help for those who are old enough to remember, and it may even well be today, the reason why the most predominant pornography magazine of its day used a bunny as its symbol. You see the association to these things. Why the egg? The idea of the egg and the kids going out is that they began this process now, that just as people went out searching for Tammuz, that they would go forth looking for this egg, and over a period of time what would happen is that these eggs would be there and available, and there were some that were hollowed out, and if you found the gift inside, it was almost as if you had found Tammuz. And so mystery Babylon the Great is stretching her fingers out throughout the world, and she is influencing now all cultures back to the foundation of her idolatrous beginning. So we now have three characters. We have Nimrod, who is the sun god, and who is also equal to or equivalent to Baal and Baal worship. We have Semiramis, who has now, through the death of her son, been able to maintain the position as queen early on over Babel, or what is Babylon. When she dies, she says that when she dies, she will still be lesser than Nimrod because she never wants to express herself as greater than him. But when she dies, she will become the moon. She will be the moon goddess. She is also recognized as the Queen of Heaven, the Queen of Heaven. To get an understanding of how she has impacted Christianity and churches with a Christian foundation, whenever you see what is identified today, and if you were to Google it or look up for the pictures of Mary holding baby Jesus, that is not a picture of Mary holding baby Jesus. That is actually developed from art that was from before the time of Mary and Jesus. That is the Mother of Heaven holding Tammuz. It's not Mary holding Jesus. Mystery Babylon the Great is weaving itself in and out of all cultures and even those who are devoted to Jesus Christ. She comes in, and now you understand why she is starting to be identified as a whore and the mother of all harlots. When we get into Revelation chapter 17, and I'll give you a little bit of a precursor here, the word whore in the original language comes from the Greek word porne. When it states later on, and I'll touch upon this again when we get into the study, when it says that the kings of the earth and the nations and stuff are having a relationship with us, the word there is pornuo. Pornuo. I'm emphasizing the portion porn. And later on it says that all the nations of the earth and all the peoples ended up having an adulterous relationship with her. And that is through both actual sexual activity with one another as a result of practicing this mindset. That Greek word is porneia. Porneia. And now you understand where we get the word pornography from. It is an expression that has to do with both the actual seductive nature of physical contact with another individual outside of wedlock, to the degree that it becomes perverted, as discussed in Romans chapter 1, that men ended up lusting after men and women after women. And it also has to do with the idolatrous nature of man to want to worship something other than God, and to be happy with being able to do so. So with that, now we are going to continue on and take a look at some passages directly associated to Israel and to Judah, and see just how significant this had become. In Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 17 to 19, we'll pick up and read what Jeremiah is seeing and what he is communicating to now the southern tribes of Judah. Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? God is communicating to Jeremiah. The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. They were now devoted in their worship to the Queen of Heaven, and ultimately now to other gods. Why? Because if you're going to worship the Queen of Heaven, well, she places an emphasis upon the sun god. And she also places an emphasis upon the miraculous birth of her son Tammuz. And from there, you have an offshoot of a number of gods and false representations of worship that these people go forth and they are now going to act upon regularly. But take a notice of this. I'm going to read it again in verse 18. The children gather the wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough. This is a family event. This isn't one individual or just a couple of people. This has now permeated through the family. I know I'm going to be ruffling some feathers here, but I'm going to have to say it. I just got to. When I was a kid growing up, if you wanted to be involved in an Easter egg hunt, what you did was you ended up going to the city's Easter egg hunt, or you went to the one put on by the public school system. But it wasn't something that was exercised in the church, or the church is. No, it was something that was done separate from the church. But now, today, every church has to have an Easter egg hunt. You have to do this for the sake of being able to appease everybody in the group. And just as we would be disgusted if we walked in and saw our spouse sleeping with somebody else, God is disgusted by the same thing. You're going to see in just a little bit, God is going to make the statement how they consider it a light thing. At the end of verse 18, he makes the statement again. They have provoked me to anger. They could care less what they are doing and how it impacts our relationship, he is saying. Just as Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, or in the face of the Lord, it doesn't matter how it impacts my relationship with God. What matters is how it impacts my relationship with my family and with my community. We are all of one speech. You know, interestingly enough, out of all of the videos that I produced for the Are You Watching series, the one that ended up being removed was the one that had montages of all the news networks throughout the nation communicating word for word the same exact thing. They were all of one speech. They were all on the same page. They were all focused upon the same exact thing, and they were all in lockstep one with another. Verse 19, do they provoke me to anger, God says? Do they not provoke themselves to confusion of their own faces? What did God say regarding Babylon? They're going to set themselves up to do whatever it is they want to do. And they're going to move themselves farther and farther away from the importance of having a relationship with me, who is their creator. And I am going to confuse their language. What does he say here? Do they not provoke themselves to the confusion of their own face. They can't make sense of things anymore because there is just this state of confusion that occurs that has them saying, well, we were all on the same page, but I kind of see this way. And no, I see it that way. No, it should happen like this. No, it'll be like that. And we begin to deceive ourselves when we move in this direction. Woe to those who say peace, peace, when there is no peace. Or for when they say peace, upon them comes sudden destruction. And so, as we are going through the book of Revelation, we see this manifesting itself here once again. Now, we've got quite a ways to go here with this, easily one more study. So we'll go ahead and break here and pick up in Jeremiah chapter 44 on our next study and continue on with this introduction to Babylon and the impact that it is having upon God's people, and then ultimately what is intended to be stated within Revelation chapter 17 and 18. Until then, God bless, and we will see you soon.